The rain had been falling for hours, a steady, whispering rhythm against the cabin windows. I remember sitting by the dim lamp, its light flickering like a slow, tired heartbeat. The forest outside was a blur of shadows and mist, the kind of darkness that felt alive, breathing softly against the glass. Every so often, I'd catch a shape move just beyond the tree line. Silent, watching, almost patient. The hum of the storm drowned out everything except the faint static from an old radio. I wasn't sure why I kept it on. Maybe I was hoping to hear another voice. The signal cracked, then cleared, just long enough for me to hear a whisper. My name, faint and distant. The lamp flickered again. The air grew colder. That's when I realized something was standing in the doorway. Still, silent. Its shape darker than the dark itself. I never should have looked up. The rain started before sunset. A thin curtain of water drifting between the trees. Soft enough to hear my own breath, but steady enough to fill the cabin with low, constant hum. I remember the pale light over the table, how it flickered against the wooden walls, and made the place feel smaller than it was. The air smelled like wet earth and old pine. Everything quiet. Everything still. I thought the night would stay like that. But the first flash of lightning brushed the window, and something shifted on the other side of the glass. Just a blur. A darker patch in the fog. Close enough to see, but not close enough to understand. I leaned back in my chair. The window creaked in the wind. My fingertips felt cold against the warm mug I held. For a moment, I wondered if it was only my tired eyes playing small tricks. Another flash, brighter, sharp, and the blur moved again, a slow drag through the rain, as if something tall stood just beyond the edge of the porch. I told myself it was a branch swaying, just a storm, just a night, but the trees weren't moving, not the way that shape did. I stayed seated, breath soft and shallow, listening to the faint rustling outside. Every shift felt deliberate. Every flicker of lightning revealed the shape a little clearer. The storm thickened. Rain hit the glass like tiny fingers. The fog pressed close, warming the window on the outside while the cool cabin air brushed my skin. Then, quietly, the feeling changed. The hum of the rain faded beneath something else. A slow drag of weight through wet leaves. Soft footsteps circling the cabin. Not hurried, not lost, aware. I tried to stand, but my legs felt heavy, as if the shadows around me were pushing down on my shoulders. I stayed by the table, watching the window while each flash of pale white light cut the darkness into sharp pieces. They're farther left this time, a taller blur, leaning toward the window, its edges trembling in the storm wind. My breath fogged the glass from where I stood, but the fog outside moved in the opposite direction, sliding up the pane like something breathing out from the other side. I stepped back, slow, quiet. The lightning paused for a long moment, long enough for the night to swallow everything. The silence pressed into my ears, thick and humming, like the woods were holding a breath of their own. When the sky finally cracked again, the silhouette stood closer, much closer, so near that I could see the faint outline of a head tilted toward mine, still blurred, still wrong. I whispered a small sound without meaning to, a thin breath that felt too loud in the stillness. It didn't move. Not yet, but I felt a pull in my chest, a cold weight like I'd been noticed. The storm eased just a little. Rain became a soft patter, slow and uneven, but the shape didn't fade with the weather. It only grew sharper. When the next flash came, it wasn't outside the window anymore. It was in the reflection, in the glass, right beside my own faint outline. Something tall and dark stood where I should have been. Its shoulders were too narrow, its head too still. No face, just a hollow shape where my reflection belonged. I blinked, hard. The lightning vanished into darkness. Only the dim cabin light remained, but the reflection stayed wrong. A second figure haunting the glass while I stood alone in the room. I reached out with one hand, touching the cold pane, warm breath drifting upward in a thin cloud. The shape in the reflection raised a hand too, but my fingers didn't move. My body stayed still. The reflection wasn't following me. It was acting on its own. A soft thud came from the porch, the kind of sound what would make under a heavy step. Then silence. A deep, swallowing silence that filled the space between my heartbeat and the rain. I backed away from the window, eyes locked on the glass, on the figure that shouldn't exist. The reflection leaned closer, as if listening to the quiet. Outside, the last rumble of thunder faded into a long, low breath of wind. When the storm finally stopped, the window cleared, wiping away the fog, the streaks, the blur. But not the figure. It stayed in the glass where my own reflection should have been, watching me from a calm, impossible stillness. And the worst part was a simple truth I understood as the pale morning light crept into the cabin. The shape at the window had never been outside. It had always been behind the glass. I moved into the house at the end of autumn, when the air carried fog in every corner, and the fields behind the fence smelled like cold dirt and wet grass. The place looked older up close. Wooden beams leaning a little, pale light slipping through thin windows, dust drifting like static in the still air. But it felt quiet. Safe enough. I thought I liked the silence. On the first night, while I unpacked in the dim hallway, I heard a soft tapping under the floor. Barely there. A faint tick, then another, as if something small brushed the boards from below. I waited, listening to the hum of the old house. Pipes, I told myself. Just a settling frame, with stretching after the rain. But pipes don't tap in slow, even beats that match the rhythm of your breathing. I stepped closer to the sound. The floor felt cool beneath my socks, a thin chill rising to the boards like a whispered warning. When I knelt down, the tapping stopped. I didn't move for a long moment. The house didn't either. The next morning, fog pressed against the windows, turning the rooms pale and quiet. I could taste the damp in the air. The tapping started again right under the kitchen tiles as I filled a glass with water. 3 slow taps. A pause. Then 2 more, almost like fingers counting. I stood still, hands shaking just enough to ripple the water in the glass. The tapping followed each small shift of my weight, as though something beneath me knew exactly where I stood. By evening, I felt the pattern in my chest. Tap, 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 each one landing under my steps with soft, patient timing. Fear didn't come all at once. It crept in, thin as a rustling draft near the baseboards, quiet as a breath I tried to slow. Late that night, when the house wrapped itself in deep silence, the tapping grew clearer, more certain, like knuckles brushing wood, testing the space between us. I moved to the hallway floor and pressed my ear against the boards, though it felt cold, almost wet, as if something damp rested just inches below. Then a scrape, a small one, childlike, dragging across the underside of the floor. My breath caught in my throat. A shadow slid across the small gap near the wall, too quick to understand, too soft to ignore. Something was down there, something that waited until the house went quiet to reach up and listen. I told myself I wouldn't check. Not at night, not alone, but the tapping kept following me. Under the hall, under the bedroom, under the living room when I tried to read. Always near, always moving with me. By the 3rd day, I couldn't take the silence between taps anymore. It felt focused, aware, like breath brushing the back of my neck whenever I stood still. So I pulled a small lamp to the center of the room, its pale light trembling on the old floorboards. My hands shook as I pried up the first plank, the nails groaning softly like they didn't want to let go. Cold, stale air rushed out from the dark space below, carrying the smell of wet soil and something older, dusty, forgotten. I lifted the second board, then a third. The tapping stopped. Everything went still, so quiet I could hear my pulse pressing against my ears. In the narrow crawl space, half hidden in the dirt, lay a small cloth bundle. I reached for it, even though every part of me said not to. The fabric felt rough, damp at the edges, as if it had been held by small hands many times. Inside was a thin, worn diary, child's handwriting, uneven, scratched, letters trembling as if written in the dark. I opened to the last page. The ink was fresh, too fresh. It listed the sound of the house. My sounds: step in the hallway, cup on the counter, breath near the window, crying last night, listening at the floor. Every line matched what I had done since moving in. Every small noise I thought I'd made alone dated and written in careful strokes. My hands, when I'm holding it, A thin silence wrapped around me, heavier than the fog outside, deeper than the shadow below the boards. I looked down into the crawl space. Nothing moved. No shape. No breath. Only the hollow dark. But the last line on the page still felt warm under my thumb, as if the ink hadn't dried. Standing above me now. I closed the diary as quietly as I could. The house didn't move. The tapping didn't return. But the silence that settled beneath the floor felt aware. Waiting. The rain started before I reached the motel. A heavy sheet of water brushing across the windshield, turning the road into a gray river of lights and shadows. The storm smelled like wet pavement and cold metal. My clothes clung to my skin, still damp from the walk to the front office. Inside the room, the pale lamp flickered, as if trying to pull itself awake. The air hummed with a low, restless static. I found an old radio on the dresser. Dust coated the knobs. The metal felt cold when I touched it, like it had been waiting for someone to break the silence. I turned the dial and the room filled with soft static. Not harsh, but warm in a strange way, like a quiet breath against my ear. Somewhere beneath the crackle, a station shifted in and out. A calm voice, almost melodic. It drifted through the hum of the storm like a forgotten memory. I sat on the bed, listening to the soft rustling between the words. The voice felt familiar, though I couldn't place it. Then I heard it clearly. My own voice, repeating a phrase I'd said hours earlier when I checked into motel. Just one night. I'll be gone by morning. My fingers tightened around the blanket. I thought maybe I was tired or losing track of the storm outside. Maybe the radio had caught a recording or some strange echo. But the tone, the quiet breath between the words, it matched me exactly. I leaned closer to the radio, the pale light from the lamp stretching my shadow long across the floor. Static swirled around the voice, pulling my attention deeper, as if the signal knew I was listening. Another line played, something I said earlier in the hallway, muttering to myself as I tried to unlock the door. Room smells like rain. I hadn't said that to anyone. No one was near me. Those were quiet thoughts, barely above a whisper. The radio crackled again, the same words repeated, but softer this time, like the station was remembering them slowly. A cold weight settled in my chest. I reached out and nudged the dial to another frequency. More static, a deep hum, something rustling inside the machine as if something small shifted just behind the speaker. The voice disappeared for a moment. Silence pressed against the walls like the whole room was holding its breath. Then the static cleared. A second voice joined the first. Not mine, not human, in the way it moved through the words. Slow, calm, as if reading from a page someone handed to it seconds ago. He sits on the bed, the new voice whispered through the static. He's breathing fast and holding the blanket with both hands. I froze. My grip tightened, without meaning to. The voice followed the motion. He's afraid now. The air in the room thinned, the hum of the radio sinking into a low, trembling tone that made my chest feel hollow. I stood up. The floor creaked beneath my feet. The voice didn't pause. He stands. My breath slipped out in a shaky exhale. The voice repeated it. My breath, with the same timing, the same sharp edge of fear. I backed away from the dresser. The radio crackled, and the voice continued in real time, matching every shift of my body. He steps toward the door. Left foot, right foot. My skin crawled. I stopped moving. I didn't even blink. The voice didn't care. He's trying not to move. The words sank into the silence like cold fingers pressing into my spine. I reached behind me and brushed the wall. The rough surface steadied me just enough to breathe again. The radio hummed, a deeper static this time, like something was crawling through the frequency. Then the voice changed tone. Softer, closer. He doesn't want to look at the window. I didn't. I couldn't. The rain streaked down the glass, catching flashes of pale light from the parking lot and twisting the reflections into tall, thin shadows. The radio crackled again. Quiet first, then clear enough to feel in my bones. He looks anyway. My eyes twitched toward the window without my permission, just a small glance, just enough to see a darker shape leaning in the fog outside. I stepped back from the wall, heart pounding in my ears. The voice whispered through the static, slow and certain. He knows it's watching him. The room felt too small, air too thin, shadows too long. The radio flickered. The hum softened. Then the voice spoke one last line, barely above a breath. He won't turn the radio off. My hand hovered over the power knob, but I couldn't touch it. My fingers shook. The machine crackled, as if waiting for my next move. The storm outside drifted into a distant hush, leaving only silence and the soft static breathing from the speaker. I didn't turn it off. I still haven't. The rain started before nightfall, soft at first, just a faint mist drifting between the trees, like a thin veil of fog. I'd taken a wrong turn on the trail, long before the storm began, but I didn't feel lost until the sky grew heavy and the air turned cold enough to sting against my skin. The forest smelled like wet bark and moss, the ground soft beneath my boots, mud shifting in slow breaths. With every step I took, I tried to follow the fading path, but the rain melted it into nothing. Branches rustled overhead, tangled shadows weaving together into one long, dark canopy. I felt alone, completely. I kept walking, hoping for a road, a light, anything. Then, through the thick curtain of rain, a faint glow appeared, pale and warm, like a lantern swaying from a distant branch. I blinked through the downpour. The light didn't flicker. It held steady, almost waiting for me. I moved toward it, my breath cold in the air, each exhale mixing with the rain, like a thin cloud. As I got closer, the lantern softened into view. Old, rusted metal, glass fog from the damp. It hung from a low branch, still and silent, as though the storm couldn't touch it. I looked around for footprints, for signs of someone nearby. There was nothing, just the sound of rain and the hum of the forest. Then I saw another lantern, farther ahead, glowing faintly through the trees. My chest tightened. A path, a real path. The light stretched deeper into the woods, each one spaced just far enough that I could see only the next, never what lay beyond it. I followed them, because I didn't know what else to do. The forest felt endless, the pale glow the only thing keeping me from disappearing into the dark. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. The rain softened into a muted whisper. Even my footsteps seemed to fade into the mud. Each lantern looked older than the last, glass cracked, metal blackened by age, light too steady to be real flame. My breath grew uneven. I felt something shift in the air, a stillness beneath the storm, like the woods were watching. I kept moving, slow, careful, every lantern pulling me forward, like a low, warm heartbeat in the dark. At some point, I started whispering small things to myself, just to hear a voice, just to break the silence. That wrapped around the trees and clung to my skin, but the forest swallowed my words. Before they reached the air, the trail dipped into a shallow valley where the fog clung to the ground in thick, ghostly layers. The lanterns glowed brighter there, pale halos floating just above the mist. I stepped through them, one by one, feeling the cold, wet fog brush against my legs like small hands. My heart slowed. The quiet pressed deeper, heavy enough to feel, in the back of my throat. I realized I couldn't hear the rain anymore, only the faint hum of the lanterns, only my breathing, in the stillness. Then, just as the sky began to lighten, a soft gray hint of dawn threading through the trees, the trail ended. The last lantern flickered, once, twice, and went out. I stopped, rain finally reaching me again. Soft drops hitting my skin, as if I'd stepped back into the world. But the lights were gone, all of them, every single lantern that had led me through the forest, vanished with the night. In their place, lined in a quiet row, across the clearing, were gravestones, old stone, edges worn smooth by years of rain, thin moss clinging to the names, carved deep into their surfaces. I stepped closer, mud sucking at my boots. My breath trembled in the cold morning air. The first name was my mother's. The second was my friends. The third, someone I knew only as a child. I moved down the row, heart sinking, hands shaking. Every gravestone held a name I recognized. People alive, people gone, people I barely remembered, people I'd lost years ago. And then, at the end of the row, half covered in wet leaves, a final stone, newer, cleaner, untouched by moss. I brushed the leaves aside with numb fingers. My own name looked back at me through the pale morning light. The forest went still, completely still. No rain, no rustling, no hum, just silence and the cold, empty space where the lantern path had been. I stood there, long after the dawn settled, waiting for the lights to return. They never did. The inn felt quieter in winter. Cold wind pressed against the wooden walls, slipping through the cracks, with a thin, icy breath. That made every lamp flicker. I'd lived alone here for years, keeping the place warm for travelers, who rarely stayed long. Most nights, the halls held nothing but silence and the soft hum of old radiators. But lately, something had changed. It started with a shadow. In the empty guest room at the far end of the hall, Room 7, a place that smelled like old blankets and rain-soaked wood, no matter how often I aired out. One night, while checking the locks, I passed by the half-closed door and saw a shape moving behind the curtain, a tall silhouette, still at first, then shifting, slow, careful steps, as if someone stood there watching the snow outside. I froze in the hallway, breath shallow, heart pushing against my ribs. No one had checked in that day. No one was staying in that room. I told myself it was a trick of the pale light, a shadow slipping between the folds of fabric. My eyes were tired. The inn was old, but the silhouette moved again. When I took a step closer, I backed away and closed the door with a trembling hand. The rustling behind the curtain stopped. The next morning, the room was empty, curtains still, floor dry, air cold and ordinary. But that night, as snow tapped against the windows, in soft, uneven breaths, the shadow returned. Same place, same tall shape behind the curtain. This time, I watched longer, long enough to see the silhouette lean, as though listening to the quiet hallway. A thin chill slid down my spine. I locked the door from the outside and walked away before I could think too much. For 3 nights, it happened again. Always the same room, always the same shifting shape. In the pale glow, I started avoiding that end of the hall, but the feeling followed me, a cold awareness, like being watched from behind a thin layer of cloth. On the 4th night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The shadow was there. Before I even reached the door, a dark outline, moving with slow, strange patience. Behind the curtain, my breath felt thick in my throat. The floorboards creaked under my hesitant steps. I reached for the handle, fingers shaking, despite the warmth of the hall. The moment the latch clicked, the rustling stopped. I pushed the door open. Silence, a heavy kind that made my ears ring. The curtain hung still, soft and pale in the dim light. No shape, no movement, just an empty room that smelled faintly of damp air. I stepped closer, feeling the cool wood under my boots. My fingertips brushed the curtain, fabric cold and slightly wet, as though someone had been standing there only moments before. Behind it, there was nothing, no figure, no footprints, only a patch of floor that glistened with a thin layer of moisture. I swallowed hard and backed away. My pulse felt loud enough to shake the walls. I left the door open and walked toward my own room, hoping the quiet would settle. It didn't. Halfway down the hallway, I noticed small droplets on the wooden floor, dark, spaced evenly apart, like wet footprints. They led away from Room 7. Not toward the stairs, not toward the exit, but toward my room at the end of the hall. My chest tightened. The cold air soured in my lungs. I followed the trail slowly, each step heavier than the last. The footprints grew clearer the closer I got. Shallow impressions shaped like bare feet, water leaking from the edges, as though they just stepped out of a river. They stopped directly in front of my door. The handle was slightly turned, just enough that the door wasn't fully shut. A thin line of darkness leaked through the crack. I didn't touch it, didn't breathe. Then, from inside my room, the softest shift of weight, like someone settling on the edge of my bed. My throat closed. A cold hum filled my ears, like the silence itself was leaning closer. I pushed the door open just an inch. My room was dim, still, smelled like cold sheets and damp air. On the wooden floor, right beside my bed, the last footprint glistened, fresh, wet, and facing me. The blanket dipped as if someone unseen had only just risen, or only just laid down. I stepped back, heart stumbling in my chest. The hallway felt too narrow, the ceiling too low, the air too aware. Somewhere deep in the quiet, a soft, rustling brushed the dark like a curtain shifting without wind. I never found the shadow in the guest room again. But every night since, I've kept my door locked and the lights low, listening to the soft, slow footsteps that moved just outside my room before dawn. Rain followed me for miles that night. Heavy, steady, blurring everything into soft streaks of gray. The road felt narrower than usual, edges melting into the dark fields on both sides. Only my headlights cut through the fog, a pale tunnel of shaking light in the storm. My hands were cold on the wheel. The heater rattled, spilling a thin breath of warm air that couldn't fight the damp creeping in. I just wanted to get home. A straight drive. Nothing strange. But the storm kept deepening. Thick curtains of rain slapping against the glass like restless fingers. The tires hissed over wet asphalt, shivering whenever I hit a dip. Then, right past a lonely row of trees, the road curved into a place I didn't recognize. A narrow bridge stretched across the water, its old wooden rails slick under the sweep of my headlights. It looked worn, leaning slightly as if the weight of the sky pressed on it. I slowed down, breathing in the smell of wet earth and something colder beneath it, like river mud and old metal. I didn't remember this bridge. Not on this route. Not anywhere. But the rain was too heavy to stop. Turning back felt impossible. The road behind me swallowed into a trembling wall of fog. So I eased forward, onto the bridge. The planks groaned under the tires. A hollow, dragging sound that vibrated through the steering wheel and up my arm. The whole bridge trembled, like something exhaling under the car. Halfway across, the headlights flickered. Just a blink, a brief pulse of static in the dark. Through the rain, I thought I saw a movement beneath the broken rails, a pale shimmer far down in the river. I didn't look again. I kept driving, feeling the bridge stretch too long beneath me. Longer than it should, longer than made sense. Then, suddenly, the ground steadied. The hum changed. I was back on the road. Smooth pavement under the wheels, as if nothing had happened. When I glanced into the mirror, the bridge was barely there, just a thin outline swallowed by fog and rain. I told myself I imagined it. Just storm night confusion. Water on the glass. Bad visibility. But the feeling stayed like a cold thumbprint on the back of my neck. The next morning, the world looked washed clean. Sky pale. Air calm. Everything soft and quiet after the storm. I drove into town to pick up supplies. Stopped at the small station near the square. An officer stood outside, boots muddy, radio crackling low static at his side. He asked how the drive had been, if the roads were clear. I mentioned the fallen branches, the washed-out edges. And then, without thinking, I said, I crossed the old bridge near the bend. Surprised it held up in that rain. The officer turned his head, so suddenly I felt my stomach drop. What bridge? His voice was quiet, too steady. The one past the trees, I said, pointing toward the road. Wooden rails. Narrow. It looked old. A long pause settled between us, thick as the fog the night before. That bridge collapsed, he said slowly, 23 years ago. I waited for him to smile, to correct himself, to say he was joking. But he didn't blink. No one's crossed it since, he added. Half of it fell straight into the river with a car on top. Driver never found. My breath felt thin, like my lungs didn't trust the air. I told him again, I crossed something. Something was there. The planks, the rails, the shaking. He shook his head, eyes narrowing with a tired kind of concern. There's nothing there now, he said. Only water. And the wreck, still buried under it. I drove home slowly, hands cold on the wheel even in the daylight. The road felt different. The fields looked wider, emptier. When I reached the bend, I slowed down, searching through the trees. Nothing. No bridge. No rails. Only the river, dark, still, breathing in the quiet morning. But as I sat there, engine humming soft and low, I felt it again, that same cold awareness from the night before. A long, trembling breath rising from below the surface of the water. I backed away and kept driving, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Sometimes, when the rain falls heavy again, I think about the bridge, how it fell under the tires, how the planks groaned like something waking up. And I wonder whose path I crossed that night, and whether the river will ever let them go. The storm began just after dusk, thick rain rolling across the yard, blurring the fence, turning the grass into a dark mirror. I stayed inside, lights low, the house breathing its usual soft hum through the walls. It felt peaceful at first, quiet, a kind of calm that only comes when you know you're alone. I made tea, hands warming around the mug as the windows rattled under the wind. A pale glow from the lamp settled across the room, soft and steady. That's when I heard it, a slow breath, warm, close, just behind my left shoulder. I froze, steam from the tea brushing my face, rain tapping the glass beside me. The breath wasn't mine. It was too gentle, too steady, like someone leaning close to look over my shoulder. When I turned, there was nothing, only the dim hallway, still and empty. I told myself it was a storm, air moving through old vents, warm drafts shifting around corners. I tried to believe that, but when I stepped into the hallway, the breath followed me, not from behind this time, from the kitchen, right where I had just been. A soft inhale, a slow exhale, almost thoughtful, almost patient. The hairs on my arms lifted. I felt the cold settle between my shoulder blades, like someone watching my back from far too close. I moved room to room, bare feet brushing the cool floor, listening to the storm beat against the house. Each room felt colder as I entered it, each corner deeper. And every time I turned away, the breath rose from the place I had just walked out of. In the living room, it came from the hallway. In the hallway, from the kitchen. In the kitchen, from the stairs, floating down in a long, slow whisper of air. It was never with me, always behind me, always where I wasn't. My chest tightened. Even the storm seemed quieter, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I climbed the stairs, each step creaking under my weight, hands brushing the cold railing. The upper floor was darker, shadows layered on shadows, the air thick with the smell of old wood and dust. I stood at the top listening, only the steady pulse of rain against the roof. No breath. I almost relaxed. Almost. Then, from the bottom of the stairs, that quiet inhale again, traveling up toward me like rising fog. I backed into my bedroom, heart beating too fast, closing the door with a soft click. The pale light from the window rested on the floorboards, thin and trembling. I waited. The house settled around me. The storm pushed against the glass. My own breath felt loud, too loud, like it didn't belong in the same room. I sat on the edge of bed, hands cold now, watching the door, watching the shadows shifting gently as the wind pressed against the house. Minutes passed, or maybe it was longer. Time felt stretched, as if the storm held it in place. Then the breath came again, inside the room, behind me, so close I felt the warmth touch the back of my neck. A soft rise, a slow fall, like someone leaning in to whisper a quiet secret. My throat tightened. I didn't move, didn't turn. I could feel the air brushing my skin, could feel the weight of someone standing right behind me, a presence heavy enough to bend the silence. And then nothing. The warmth faded. The breath stopped. The room fell into a stillness, so complete I could hear the rhythm of the rain far, far away. I turned finally, slowly, eyes adjusting to the dim. No one was there, only the pale window light, the empty space, the quiet. But the air behind me still felt disturbed, like something had been standing there for a long, long time. I don't know what moved through the house that night, why it followed my footsteps from room to room, always staying just behind the place I had been. But sometimes when the storm thickens and the windows hum under the pressure of the wind, I still feel that soft warmth on the back of my neck. A slow breath, a quiet pause, as if the house remembers where I am, and waits just one room away. The rain had been steady since dawn. A thin gray curtain drifting across the street, soft mist crawling under the door each time the wind pushed against it. I kept the shop warm, lamps glowing in pale circles over rows of tired clocks waiting for careful hands. The air smelled like oil and old wood. A quiet hum lived in the walls, the kind that makes you feel you're never truly alone. That morning, I noticed something odd on the doorstep, a small shape wrapped in wet cloth, rain dripping from the corners, as if someone had left it there only moments before. I opened the door slowly. Cold air brushed my skin, sharp with the smell of rain. Inside the bundle lay a clock. Heavy, old, its brass frame darkened, its glass cracked into thin ghost-like lines. It wasn't one of mine. I didn't recognize the style. Still, it felt familiar somehow, as if I had touched it in some forgotten hour. I carried it inside, water trailing behind me, and set it on the workbench. The metal felt colder than anything should feel indoors. When I opened the back, a drop of water slid down the gears like a tear. Everything inside was soaked, but the movements, they were intact, restorable, almost waiting. As I cleaned the gears, wiping away the moisture and brushing dust from the tiny teeth, something strange happened. Time felt slower, or thicker, like the room was moving a little behind me. The lamps dimmed and brightened in gentle sighs. I told myself it was a storm playing tricks with the power, but the air felt different. Heavy, dense, tasting faintly of metal. By evening, the rain had grown louder, turning the windows into blurred mirrors of pale light. The clock sat finished on the bench, its hands resting at midnight, waiting for the first breath of motion. I wound it carefully. Each twist of the key echoed through my chest, slow and deep. Then it happened, a soft tick, one single beat at a time. Then another, and another, steady, perfect. But the room didn't feel steady. The air shifted, like the walls inhaled. The hum changed pitch, vibrating along the shelves of clocks that weren't ticking. I leaned closer. The glass caught my reflection, but not as I stood, not as I moved. It showed me lying on the floor, still, eyes open, mouth parted as if to whisper a last word I couldn't hear. I blinked. The reflection blinked back a second too late. I stepped back, heart tightening, legs warm then cold again as fear settled in. The ticking grew louder, not in the room, in my bones, in the air around my ears. Each beat felt like it belonged to a different moment. Moments ahead, moments behind. I tried to turn the clock away, but the glass still caught my eyes, pulling me toward it, showing flashes in the thin cracks that spidered across the front. A street I didn't recognize. My own hands trembling, rain falling harder than the storm outside. And me, the same me from the floor, standing in the road, staring at something I couldn't quite see. The visions came faster. Shadows crossing behind me, fog creeping low around my feet, my breath visible even indoors. The ticking deepened, as if the clock was chewing time one bite at a time. I slammed my hand over the glass. The ticking stopped. The silence hit me like cold water. The shop felt wrong, too still. The lamps froze in mid-flicker. Rain outside paused in a sheet of unmoving gray. I lifted my hand. The clock's glass was warm now, and the reflection no longer matched me at all. The other version of me was closer to glass, as if leaning in from another side. A faint breath fogged the inner surface, even though the clock had no openings, no space or air. I whispered, or maybe just thought the words. "What are you showing me?" The reflection answered by tilting its head in a slow, broken angle I knew my neck couldn't make. Something moved behind it, a shadow crossing the frozen street. From the earlier vision, my chest tightened, my fingers trembled on the frame. I felt the future pressing against me, cold and heavy, like a weight placed gently on my spine. Then a single tick, soft, sharp, ending the stillness. The rain outside fell again. The lamps flickered back to life. The shop breathed normally, but the reflection was gone. Only my tired face remained, dimmed by the pale light, eyes wide with fear I couldn't hide. The clock kept ticking, steady and calm, as if nothing unusual had ever happened. I keep it on the shelf now behind the counter, where I can't see the glass unless I choose to. But every so often, the ticking slips out of rhythm, just for a beat, and the air around me thickens warm and metallic. And I know the clock is showing me another moment I've not yet lived. Another ending waiting quietly just ahead of me. The fog had been thick all evening, so dense it pressed against the motel windows like a slow-moving tide. Late autumn, cold enough that my breath hung in the air even inside the lobby. I kept the desk lamp low, letting its pale circle of light fall across the counter and the empty chairs. Nights were usually quiet here. Lonely, but familiar. I was making tea when the knocking came. 2 sharp taps on the glass door. Not loud, just enough to pull my eyes up from the steam curling in my hands. A traveler stood there, coat dripping, hair plastered to his forehead, fog swirling behind him as if it clung to his back. His face was calm, tired, eyes down and like he hadn't slept in days. I unlocked the door, a rush of cold air sliding past my legs as he stepped inside. He didn't speak much, only asked for a room in a low, trembling voice that felt too soft for someone soaked to the bone. I handed him a key, watched water trail from his sleeves onto the worn carpet. He thanked me without lifting his eyes, then walked toward the hall with slow, heavy footsteps that seemed to fade a little too quickly. When I looked up again, the fog outside pressed close to the glass as if trying to follow him in. Hours went by. The motel settled into its usual silence, the kind that makes every little hum and rustling shadow feel louder than it should. I tried reading, tried keeping busy, but something in the air felt wrong, like a weight sitting quietly behind my ribs. Near midnight, I realized I hadn't heard anything from his room. No footsteps overhead, no soft movements in the hall, just a steady hush of fog against the windows. The unease kept growing, small at first, then colder, sharper, until finally I opened the security screen behind the counter. I rewound the footage, watched the empty parking lot drowned in fog, watched the hours slide back to the moment of the knocking. 2 taps, clear as day, but the doorway was empty. No figure, no coat, no shadow behind the glass, just fog shifting in slow pale waves. I leaned closer, heart tightening, rewinding again, every time. The sound of knuckles on the glass, but no one there. Yet I remembered his face, his dripping coat, his voice, his footsteps fading down the hall. My hands felt cold as I stepped out from behind the counter. The lobby seemed larger now, filled with pockets of shadow that hadn't been there earlier. Something wet glimmered near the door, drops on the floor, a small puddle where he had stood. I followed the thin trail to the coat rack by the stairs. A dark coat hung there, heavy with rain, dripping slowly onto the old wooden floor. I reached out, fingers hovering near the sleeve. The fabric pulsed with cold, as if the rain inside it hadn't come from this world. I whispered his room number under my breath as I climbed the stairs. Soft footsteps, shaking hands. The hall smelled of damp wood and something faintly metallic. When I reached the room, the door was closed. The key I'd given him still hung from the lock, untouched. My breath caught. The air around me felt still, frozen. I pushed the door open. The room was empty, the bed undisturbed. The window shut tight with fog pressed against it, like a face trying to look inside. No footprints, no wet carpet, no sign anyone had stepped inside at all. I stood there in the quiet, every part of me struggling to breathe evenly, listening to the soft of the lights overhead. When I returned downstairs, the coat was still there, still dripping, still cold, but the puddle beneath it had spread as if someone had just walked away moments before. I turned off the lobby light and let the fog fill the windows with its pale, shapeless glow. Some nights I think I hear the knocking again, 2 gentle taps on the door. Clear, steady, but I never look right away. I wait, listen, let the silence settle. Because I know the camera will show nothing, but the coat will always be hanging there, wet and waiting, as if its owner never really left at all. The storm had been chasing me for miles. Late winter rain swept across the highway in long, cold sheets, and the wipers kept smearing water instead of clearing it. It was close to midnight. The air smelled like wet asphalt and metal, sharp and heavy in my breath each time I inhaled. I just wanted to get home. Warm clothes, quiet rooms, a door I could lock behind me. When the road dipped, I saw the tunnel ahead, a long concrete mouth waiting in the dark. Its pale lights flickered against the fog that spilled across the entrance, soft and swirling like smoke without fire. I slowed down. The storm felt quieter here, but the silence inside the tunnel settled over everything like thick dust. My tires hummed on the slick ground as the walls pulled me in. At first, I didn't notice anything strange, just the steady rhythm of driving alone in a place meant for passing through. But the tunnel kept going, and going. The same panels of concrete, the same stains on the walls, the same low hum echoing back at me from somewhere too far behind. I checked the clock. Only a few minutes had passed, yet it felt longer, much longer. A pale glow appeared in my mirrors, 2 faint circles floating in the dark. Headlights, another car, far back but steady. Relief washed through me for a moment. At least I wasn't alone. At least someone else was stuck in this strange stretch with me. I kept driving, waiting for the exit to appear, waiting for anything to change. But the tunnel walls looked frozen in place, like they were looping, repeating, holding me inside their pattern. Minutes slipped past, then more. Too many for a tunnel this short. The headlights behind me never moved, never grew or shrank. They just hovered there, locked at the same distance as if tied to me by an invisible rope. A cold tightness spread across my chest. My fingers felt stiff against the wheel. I pressed the gas a little harder. The hum under the tires deepened, vibrating through the seat and up my spine. The lights behind me didn't change, not even an inch. A thought crept in, quiet, unwelcome. What if the car wasn't following me? What if it wasn't moving at all? My breath started to shake. I leaned forward, peering into the empty stretch ahead, hoping for a curve or a sign or an end. Nothing, just the same darkness and the same pale glow stretching forever. I whispered to myself soft, shaky words that didn't help. The tunnel swallowed them before they left my lips. My pulse kicked harder. I touched the brakes, just enough to slow down, just enough to test the lights behind me. My car eased back into a slower roll, and the headlights behind me dimmed at the same time. Perfectly, exactly, like a reflection with no mirror. I stopped breathing. The hum faded. The whole tunnel held still. I pressed the brake again, harder this time. My tires squealed softly as I came to stop. In the mirror, the headlights stopped too, frozen, waiting. The storm outside felt distant, muted, like it wasn't real anymore. I sat there in the silence, the air cold enough that my breath hung in front of me like a small ghost. Every instinct in me screamed to keep driving, but my limbs felt heavy, like the tunnel walls were pulling at them with invisible hands. I turned off my engine. The lights behind me blinked out, just gone, snuffed out in a single breath. Darkness filled the tunnel behind me like a slow-moving tide. It crawled forward, soft and thick, clinging to the walls and the ceiling and the edges of my vision. My hands shook as I fumbled the keys, the silence so deep it pressed against my ears like static. When the engine restarted, the darkness behind me seemed to pull back, just a little, as if it were watching, waiting. I didn't look at the mirrors again. I kept my eyes on a faint glow far ahead, a glow I prayed was the exit and not another trick of the endless walls. After what felt like hours, the light grew stronger, brighter, wide enough to spill across the hood of my car. The tunnel finally opened into the storm again. Wind and rain washed over me so fast it felt like waking up from a long, suffocating dream. But when I reached home, safe in my driveway, I noticed something that made my breath turn cold again. My taillights reflected faintly off something wet on the street. 2 small circles, pale, even, like headlights only a few feet behind me. And when I stepped inside, closing the door, the darkness outside stayed still, watching. Rain pressed against the windshield in a steady rhythm. The road ahead vanished into gray. Fog curled along the edges, soft and thick, smothering the trees and fences in a quiet haze. It was late autumn. Cold seeped through the cracked window, mixing with the damp smell of earth and wet leaves. The heater rattled, trying to push warmth into the cab, but the chill lingered. I slowed down. The fog made everything seem closer than it was. Shadows stretched in odd ways, curving along the roadside like they didn't belong. Then I saw her, a small figure standing in the center of the road. A child, thin, drenched, pale hair plastered to her forehead. She didn't move when I stopped, just stood there, hands hanging at her sides, water dripping into tiny puddles at her feet. I opened the door. Cold air rushed in, bringing with it the smell of wet grass and the faint tang of something metallic. "Are you okay?" I whispered. Her eyes met mine, wide, dark, and still. She didn't answer at first, just stared, quiet as the rain falling around us. I stepped closer. The wet road hissed under my boots. The fog swirled, curling around her small frame, soft and heavy. Then she spoke. "You shouldn't be out here either." Her voice was soft, almost lost in the whisper of rain. A warning, but not one I could place. I blinked. The words lingered, clinging to the damp air. I reached out. She didn't step back, but she didn't move forward. Her small fingers trembled slightly, cold as the mist that wrapped around us. I wanted to take her inside, to warm her up, to keep her safe. But before I could, she turned her head slightly and the fog swallowed her. I froze. The air felt heavier, dense with silence. The rain still fell, but the soft patter against the pavement sounded distant, like it was coming from far away. I stepped forward, calling her name softly. The road stretched empty before me. Shadows bent into themselves, and nothing moved. No footprints in the wet asphalt. No sound of small boots or splashing water. Just a fog, hanging thick and cold, a curtain drawn across the world. I stood there for a long time, hands damp and chilled, breath coming out in shaky clouds. The trees around the road rustled softly, but nothing else stirred. The memory of her words echoed in my chest. "You shouldn't be out here either." I realized then that the warning had been for me as much as her. The road felt endless, the fog heavier than any storm, and my own shadow stretched thin, unsteady in the dim light. I turned back to the car, wet boots leaving faint impressions on the slick surface. The heater hummed softly, filling the cab with warmth that didn't reach my hands, or the weight in my chest, or the emptiness left behind. Driving away, the fog followed me for miles, curling in from the roadside, tangling with the headlights until I could barely see my own reflection. Sometimes I think I can still hear her, soft footsteps along the wet asphalt, and that low, quiet warning echoing through the mist. "You shouldn't be out here either." The road is empty now, but the emptiness feels alive, and the memory of her haunts every curve, every bend in the fog. The room was quiet when I woke. Heavy curtains blocked the pale morning light, but the hum of the heater filled the corners with warmth. I reached for my phone. It vibrated softly against the nightstand. A new voice memo. I didn't recognize the icon. No label, just the timestamp from last night. My hands trembled as I tapped to play. A soft hiss of static greeted me. Then me, breathing, slow, even, the sound of sleep, my own chest rising and falling, captured in the thin, intimate darkness of my bedroom. And then something else. A whisper, barely audible, so close it seemed to brush my ear through the speaker. Words I couldn't make out at first, shifting with the soft cadence of someone leaning right beside the mic. I froze. The hum from the heater felt louder now, pressure building in my chest. Cold crept along my arms like the shadow of a hand I hadn't seen. The whisper came again, so close this time I could almost feel the breath on my neck. I sat up, phone still in hand. The recording kept playing, even though I hadn't pressed pause. Every inhale and exhale matched mine exactly, as if it had been waiting. I turned in bed, eyes scanning the dim room, but there was nothing, just a faint smell of linen, and the air heavy with warm dust. The whisper changed slightly, closer now, patient, filling the edges of the room like fog pressing through a door. It was soft, intimate, and wrong. My fingers shook as I hit stop. Silence, but the tension lingered. The memory of that breath like a shadow on my skin. I checked the phone. Nothing else had been recorded. No video. No calls. Just that one memo that shouldn't have existed. I replayed it once, twice, 3 times. The The whisper never moved further in, never revealed itself, always at the same distance, close enough to be terrifyingly personal, far enough to remain unseen. I sat on the edge of the bed, breath shallow, listening to the subtle creak of the floorboards under the weight of the room. Everything felt ordinary. The clock ticking, the heater humming, the curtains still drawn. But I knew it hadn't been ordinary. I tried to tell myself it was a dream, a trick of my mind half asleep, half awake. But the sound, so precise, so intimate, couldn't have been conjured. My eyes moved to the doorway. Shadows pulled in the corners, static and still. The air smelled faintly metallic and damp, like a fog rolling through a basement. I couldn't shake the feeling that the room itself had remembered last night, that someone or something had been tracing every movement while I slept. I left the phone on the nightstand, screen glowing faintly, and walked slowly across the room, each step pressing into the carpet, soft, careful, so as not to disturb what might still linger. The whisper didn't come again, but I felt it anyway, a presence hovering just beyond reach, patient, watching, breathing with me. I sat back down, hands wrapped around my knees, and listened to the silence. Not quiet, heavy, waiting. Even now, hours later, the memory of that recording sits on the edge of my mind. A soft, unseen voice that belongs somewhere too close and nowhere at all. The phone lies there still, silent, but I can feel it, like it's breathing, like it knows I'm awake, like it remembers every quiet, private moment that I thought was mine alone. The forest was still, fog curling between the trees like smoke over a dying fire. Autumn had left the air crisp, leaves damp beneath my boots, and the smell of wet pine pressed against my nose. Each night, I noticed it first from the edge of my porch. The cabin next door, empty for years, its windows flickering with pale light. One moment dark, the next a soft glow that breathed across the walls. At first, I told myself it was a trick of the wind, branches scraping the glass, reflections from my own windows. But it happened every night. The same slow rhythm, on and off, like a heartbeat I could not see. I stepped closer once. The rain had left the ground slick, cold seeping through my shoes. I reached for the doorknob, thinking maybe someone had moved in, but the lock was solid, and the cabin had been abandoned. Nobody inside for as long as I remembered. The lights flickered again. A pale hum seemed to rise from within, so faint I almost thought I imagined it. I lifted my hand to the wall, the rough wood cold against my skin, and watched the windows glow like soft amber eyes. Curiosity pulled me forward, toward the small path between the cabins. The forest pressing on either side, branches brushing my arms with wet fingers, and the fog wrapped around my ankles, thick as wool. I reached the cabin side. The lights blinked out the moment I touched the door. No hum, no glow, only silence and the smell of damp earth and pine needles. I pressed my ear to the wood. Nothing moved inside. No shift of furniture, no breath. Just a soft sigh of wind through the eaves. Yet when I turned, the windows glowed again, faint, trembling, as if the cabin had exhaled without sound. I circled the front, heart slowing, listening to my own soft steps on the wet path. The door was locked tight, the wood cold and unyielding, and still the lights flickered inside, warm and pale, like a memory trapped in glass. I wondered about the air itself, the way it shifted around the cabin, heavier here, lighter there, carrying whispers I could almost hear, breath barely brushing my skin, but vanishing the moment I tried to catch it. I stayed until my hands ached, the chill of night pressing into my bones. The glow faded slowly, not with the suddenness of a switch, but like a candle surrendering to the dark. Yet I knew it would return, the same rhythm, night after night. Walking back to my porch, the fog followed, curling along my legs, soft and patient. I glanced at the cabin one last time. Its windows were dark now, but I could almost feel the soft film of light beneath the walls, watching, breathing, alive in a way I could not touch. I went inside, closing the door behind me, the warmth of the room never quite reaching the chill in my chest. Even from inside, I felt the faint glow, a gentle reminder that some things remain even when you cannot see them. And every night, as darkness fell and the fog rose, I knew the empty cabin next door was waiting, its lights blinking softly, quietly, as if it remembered me even when I was gone. Rain tapped against the roof in soft, uneven rhythms. The night was thick with fog, and the air smelled like wet earth and fallen leaves, sharp and heavy in my lungs. I had noticed it before. Every time it rained, softly, quietly, my name would come, a whisper carried on the wind through the open window, fragile as a moth's wing. At first, I ignored it. I thought it was the trees, the way branches scraped together, making voices from shadows. But the whispers were different, deliberate, patient, and always my name. Tonight, the rain was steady, drumming on the roof like a rhythm I could follow, and the whisper came again, clearer, closer. I leaned toward the window. Cold air pressing against my face, droplets landing on my skin like icy fingers. Who's there? I asked softly, more of myself than anyone else. The voice answered. Slow, soft. It said my name. I froze. The hair on my arms rose. The rain felt heavier, smothering, as if the night had pressed itself closer just to listen. Something in the sound made me hesitate. It wasn't just any voice. It sounded like mine. Every inflection, every small tremble, echoed back from the darkness outside. Curiosity pulled me forward. I stepped closer to the sill, hands brushing the cold wood, the fog pressing against my shoulders like wet cloth. Who is it? I whispered again. The voice repeated my name. This time, longer, drawing the syllables out slowly, carefully, matching my own breathing. A shiver crawled down my spine. I backed away, heart quickening, and the whisper paused, just long enough for the silence to feel heavy. Then it came again, closer. The voice still sounded like mine, but it wasn't me, not inside the room, not anywhere I could see. I wanted to run, to lock the window, to pretend the night hadn't shifted. But my legs felt like stone, my breath caught in the wet, cold air. The whisper lingered, patient, watching me, folding around the room with every droplet on the glass. It was intimate, too intimate, like someone had learned every edge of my voice and followed me home just to call it back to me. I pressed my hand against my chest, listening to my own heartbeat, matching it with the quiet rhythm of the rain outside. The whisper answered it, soft, mocking, echoing my pulse and filling the corners of the room I thought were empty. I stepped back. The fog outside thickened, shadows twisting in the dim light of the street lamp. I could feel the wet air pressing to the open window, carrying the whisper, and every instinct told me to leave, to close the door, to hide from the sound that had my voice but wasn't me. I stayed still instead. The rain slowed, tapping softer now, and the whisper retreated slightly. But it didn't disappear. It lingered at the edge of hearing, patient, watching, waiting. Hours passed. I kept the window closed after that, but I could still feel it pressing just outside, the knowledge that the voice knew me, my voice, my name, everything I thought I owned in the dark. And when the rain returns, soft and steady, I know it will call again, and I will hear it, every syllable, every tremble of sound, as if it were mine, as if it were waiting for me to answer. The fire had burned low, its embers glowing faintly in the cool night air. Pine needles pressed damp against my palms as I brushed them aside to settle closer. The forest smelled of wet wood, earth, and the lingering chill of early autumn. I thought I was alone. The wind whispered between the trees, branches scraping softly, a rustling like static through the dark. Then I noticed them, small glimmers in the tree line, pairs of eyes, reflecting the dying firelight, pale and still. I held my breath. The crackle of embers sounded too loud, too intimate in the hush of the forest. I shifted slightly. The eyes did, too, not just shifting the shadows, but tracking me, moving with me from behind the trees, always just out of reach. I rose to my knees, hands brushing cold pine needles, the air heavy and damp. I leaned closer, thinking maybe they belonged to an animal, a deer, perhaps, watching quietly from the dark. But the reflections didn't scatter. They stayed, faint, patient, following me even as I stepped forward, as if they were not fixed to any body I could see. The forest felt smaller suddenly. The silence stretched, thick and expectant. My own heartbeat seemed loud, vibrating through my chest and echoing in the still night. Every footstep I took was met with a mirrored shift somewhere deeper, where shadows pooled. I paused. The smell of damp pine filled my nose. A faint hum, like the air itself breathing, wound around my ears. I realized then that I could not approach them. They weren't ahead, they were everywhere, watching. I tried to blink them out, close my eyes for a heartbeat. When I opened them, the reflections had moved again. No matter the angle, no matter the tree, they were behind me, waiting. I sank back to the ground, hands pressed against the cold needles, feeling the weight of the forest and the eyes all around me. Even in the darkness, even with my back pressed to the firelight, I could sense their patience, silent, unmoving, a presence not meant to be chased. The fire hummed softly, tiny sparks drifting into the black. The eyes lingered, faint glimmers that would not leave. I stayed still, breath shallow, letting the shadows stretch, letting the forest settle around me. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt dense, like fog wrapping every branch, every shadow, every reflection that watched. I never moved, never looked away, just stayed, listening to the static rustle of the leaves and the soft, unblinking glimmer of eyes in the tree line. Eventually, the fire burned lower. The forest held me in its quiet grip. The eyes faded with the dimming light. But I knew they would return with the next dark night, waiting, watching, just beyond the edges of sight. Rain slicked the highway in long, silver streaks. The windshield wipers traced slow, rhythmic arcs, and the air inside the car smelled faintly of wet asphalt and leather. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. That's when I first noticed it, a shadow, barely there, in the passenger side window. I blinked. The reflection trembled with the movement of the rain, but the shape stayed. A figure, seated, silent. I told myself it was the streetlights, or the angle of my own reflection, a trick of wet glass. But it didn't go away. Every time I glanced, it was closer, clearer, its outline pale against the dark interior. I could see the faint curve of a shoulder, the suggestion of a head. Though the seat beside me was empty, I slowed the car. The tires hissed over the soaked asphalt. Cold sweat pressed along my spine. The rain pattered harder, each dropping on the roof and windows, sounding impossibly loud in the quiet of the car. I stole another glance. The figure remained, still, silent, and impossibly still, like it had been there long before I noticed that I touched the passenger seat. Leather cold, untouched, empty beneath my hand. The figure didn't vanish from the reflection. It moved with me. Every adjustment of the rear-view mirror shifted it subtly, as if it existed only in the glass that I tried not to look. Concentrated on the road, on the hum of the tires, on the smell of rain and leather and oil. But my eyes kept flicking to the reflection beside me, to the empty space that wasn't empty. That I slowed further, every nerve in my body tight. The storm pressing down, the headlights cutting through mist, casting shadows that moved unnaturally along the wet road. The figure stayed, and I realized that I was not alone, not in the reflection, not really. That I stopped completely at a curve, engine idling, the rain pounding like soft fists against the roof. The reflection, it tilted its head slightly, a movement almost human, almost deliberate, and I felt it watching me through the glass even though no one sat there. That I held my breath. The car's interior smelled like wet asphalt. My own fear thick in my chest, and the storm outside pressed around me like a living thing. The figure did not vanish. It did not move toward me. It simply waited that I shifted in my seat. The reflection followed. Every minor adjustment, every small twitch in my hand was mirrored perfectly, as if the glass itself had learned my shape, my movements, my presence. That I started driving again, slowly, carefully, and the figure stayed. Through every bend, through every puddle that splashed along the road, it remained beside me, silent, patient, its presence pressing on the air like a weight. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. The storm thinned, the rain easing into mist. Yet I could not shake the reflection. It stayed in the passenger seat, a quiet, impossible companion, and I knew that I had never truly been alone. Even now, when I park, when the engine dies, when I leave the car and step into the damp night, I remember that reflection, the way it moves when I move, the way it waits, and I cannot help but feel that it always will. The rain had soaked the doorstep by morning. Puddles reflected the pale light of a gray sky, and the air smelled of wet stone and damp wood. That's when I saw it. A journal, edges curling, pages pressed flat by the storm that I picked it up. Water dripped through the covers, and the leather felt cold, soft, almost alive under my fingers. The first page was scrawled in neat handwriting. Familiar. Too familiar. IT described my morning. Exactly. The way I had poured coffee, the quiet hum of the kettle, even the scrape of my chair against the floor. I shivered. The pen strokes were precise, patient, each word echoing moments I had thought private. I flipped a page. More entries. The walk to the mailbox. The turn of the doorknob. Even the pause I had taken to breathe through a rising anxiety. It was all there. The rain pattered on the roof, soft, insistent, like a metronome keeping time with my pulse. I held the journal closer, smelling the paper, tinged with wet ink and storm-soaked air, and tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. It wasn't. Each page unfolded another layer. Every movement, every glance, every breath recorded as if someone had been watching, waiting. The entries became more detailed, more intimate, the pen never slipping, never hesitating. I turned to the last page. The handwriting was the same, and the date was tomorrow. A shiver traced my spine. I pressed my palm to the page, feeling the damp ink smear, the paper trembling slightly beneath my touch. The room seemed colder, the rain outside louder, hitting the windows with a hollow insistence. I read the words. They described everything I would do tomorrow. The morning, the walk, the pause, the moment I would notice the journal itself. My breath caught. The rain seemed to slow, the world narrowing to this journal, to this impossible certainty. I stepped back. The floorboards creaked underfoot, soft and uneven. The air was thick with wet earth, with paper and storm, and the journal lay heavy in my hands like a pulse I could not escape. I wanted to drop it, to run, to step outside into the rain and leave behind. But my fingers wouldn't let go. The pages whispered against each other, tiny movements of paper, almost alive. I glanced out the window. Fog curled along the edges of the yard, and the street beyond was empty, silent. No footprints in the wet gravel, no one approaching. And yet, somewhere I felt the weight of unseen eyes. I returned to the journal, read the lines again, the predictions of tomorrow, the certainty of someone else's presence knowing me so completely. My chest tightened. Every breath felt heavy, every heartbeat a drum echoing against the walls. The storm continued, steady, patient. The journal lay open on the table, pages dark with rain, the ink whispering secrets I could not escape. I sat in silence, alone, listening to the rain and the quiet weight of the words that described my life as if it had already happened, as if it were waiting. I didn't close it. I couldn't, and I couldn't look away. The last page stared at me, dated tomorrow, and the world outside seemed to hold its breath, watching, patient, unblinking. The night was heavy with fog, a damp chill clinging to my skin, and the street smelled of wet asphalt and earth. I noticed it first from my window, a figure, black and still, standing beneath the flickering lamp post at the corner of my yard. I blinked. The lamp buzzed softly, its pale light flickering across the fog, casting moving shadows that seemed almost deliberate. The figure didn't move. It just waited. I held my breath. The hum of the bulb filled the silence, the occasional drip of water from leaves a tiny percussion. I thought it was my eyes playing tricks, a trick of shadow and fog. But night after night it returned. Same post, same stillness. Sometimes I watched from behind the curtain, feeling the carpet under my toes, soft, warm, and grounding, while the cold seeped from the street through the glass. Each night it felt closer. Somehow, closer in presence, though not in distance. I tried to tell myself it was just a person passing. Then I would notice the emptiness of the street, the silence stretching beyond the lamp's pale glow. Then the lamp flickered more violently, buzzing sharp and loud. The shadow stirred as if sensing it, and when the bulb finally burned out, I saw it move, slow, patient. It glided to the next post, keeping the same distance from the empty space, as if the lamp had been its anchor. The air felt thicker, wet fog pressing against my cheeks, my pulse echoing in my ears. I wanted to step outside, to see it, to confirm it wasn't imagination, but the soft hum of the house, The creak of the floor under my feet told me I should stay. I stayed. The nights continued. The fog rolling low. The lamppost casting pale, trembling circles of light. Each time one bulb died, the figure moved to the next, silent, deliberate, its form barely more than shadow, but somehow undeniably there. I would watch from the window, my breath fogging the glass, hands pressed to the frame. The smell of damp wood and wet grass filled the room, and I could hear the soft tap of distant water against the sidewalk. I never saw it fully, just the outline, the dark, shifting mass beneath the weak lamps. And yet, I felt it everywhere, in the fog pressing against the glass, in the shadow pulling at the edge of my vision, in the quiet hum of the street at night. Eventually, the lamps dimmed one by one, and the figure, patient as ever, followed, moving closer, never hurried, never wavering. The fog thickened, and stillness filled the space where sound had been heavy, waiting. I sat by the window, listening to the quiet, watching the soft, empty glow of lamps fade, and felt it, the weight of presence, the certainty that it would keep coming. Even when the light was gone, even when I turned away, the night remained, the fog remained, and the shadow waited just beyond the reach of any light, patient, silent, and unyielding. The morning smelled of wet earth and cold rain. Puddles clung to the porch, reflecting the gray sky. That's when I saw it, an umbrella, open and dripping, leaning against the door. I hadn't left it there. Not yesterday. Not the day before. And yet, it was always waiting after the storm. I picked it up once. The fabric was cold and heavy with water, and the handle slick against my palm. I carried it to the trash, listening to the rain patter on the roof, and watched it disappear beneath the lid. Morning came. The umbrella was back, dripping, open, exactly where it had been. I ran my fingers along the wet metal, feeling the slick tension of the ribs, and the air smelled of damp wood and storm-soaked leaves. I tried ignoring it, left it leaning against the wall, hoping the rain and time would move it elsewhere. But every morning, after every storm, there it was, dripping, patient, waiting. I began noticing small things. The quiet way of the umbrella, in the corner of my eye, the soft tap of water on the porch boards, the shadow it cast under the dim light of the morning. It felt alive, not moving but aware. One evening, I tried taking further, down the street, to the trash at the curb. The air smelled of wet asphalt, the hum of distant traffic muted beneath the storm. I dropped in the bin, listened to the soft thud of the metal handle, and hoped. Morning came. I opened the door, and it was there again, dripping wet, open, exactly where it had been. I began to watch it, silently from the window, breath fogging the glass. Every storm, every puddle, it returned. I felt the rain to the walls, the damp seeping into my bones, and the umbrella waited, patient, inevitable. I stopped touching it, stopped moving it. I left it by the door, letting the rain soak it further, the air thick with wet wood and iron. It was part of the storm now, like the fog, like the quiet hum of the morning. Sometimes I wondered if it ever moved while I slept, sliding across the porch, following the drip of water, listening. I never checked. The silence was heavier than any answer. It became routine. Storms came, umbrella returned. I stopped feeling startled, stopped hoping it would disappear. The rain fell, the puddles formed, and the umbrella leaned against the door, patient, open, dripping. I accepted it, not as a presence, not as a threat, but as part of the rhythm of the house, the quiet, endless echo of rain, and the shadow of something that waits. Morning after morning, the rain fell, the world smelled of wet earth and cold wood, and the umbrella stayed, dripping, open, waiting. The night pressed against the glass. Rain tapped softly on the windowsill, and the hum of the fan stirred the air in the room. It began almost imperceptibly, a vibration through the blades, a whisper threading through the steady hum. I paused, the scent of damp air filling my nose, listening. It spoke my name, soft, curling around the edges of my mind. Secrets slipped through the rotation of the fan. Things I hadn't told anyone, things I hadn't even admitted to myself. I shivered, feeling the cold unbrush my skin. Curiosity pulled me closer. I rested my forehead against the window frame, watching shadows shift in the pale light of the street lamp outside. The voice grew clearer, familiar and intimate, like someone breathing just behind me. Though I was alone, it spoke of tonight, the night I would disappear. I tried to laugh, but it caught in my throat. The hum became a pulse, a rhythm matching my own heartbeat. The room smelled of rain and metal, and the air felt thick, almost liquid. I wanted to turn the fan off, to stop the voice, to stop the predictions, but my fingers froze on the switch. I couldn't move. The whisper slipped further inside my thoughts, a soft weight on my chest. I heard footsteps. No, not footsteps, just an impression of movement, the brush of a presence I couldn't see. The voice described it all, every shadow in the room, every rustle of fabric, every breath I didn't know I had taken. It knew, and I realized I had been listening for hours. Outside, the wind rasped against the panes, carrying the scent of wet leaves and distant earth. Inside, the hum became a language, pulling me forward, pulling me to a quiet surrender. I wanted to close the window, to shut out the night, but my hands wouldn't obey. The fan whispered the moment I would vanish, and with it came a strange calm, like floating in the fog. I imagined the darkness beyond the glass, felt the wet chill of air and rain, and the whisper told me it would be gentle, that I wouldn't struggle. I sank onto the floor. The hum wrapped around me, filling every corner of the room, every corner of my mind. The rain pattered faster, the night grew heavier, and the whisper slid into silence, leaving only the soft vibration of the fan. I breathed slowly, the scent of wet metal and storm lingering, and understood that waiting was the only thing left. Curiosity had led me here, and surrender felt inevitable, like watching shadows stretch across the walls, knowing they would not stop. The window creaked. The air shimmered with quiet expectation. The fan hummed one last note, and the room seemed to fold in on itself. I did not move. I did not reach for the switch. I waited, and the whisper waited with me. The house felt heavier tonight. Rain tapped faintly against the windows, but it seemed duller somehow, as if the drops themselves were quieter. I moved through the hallway. The carpet soft beneath my bare feet, but the hum of electricity was gone. The fridge didn't whisper. In the kitchen, the lamp on the table breathed stillness instead of light. I leaned against the doorframe, listening. The clock on the wall didn't tick. The pendulum hung frozen, and even the air felt thicker, holding its own silence against my skin. I walked to the bedroom, hearing only the soft scrape of my steps. Outside, the rain had thinned to a whisper, yet even that seemed muted. The house had begun to shrink into soundlessness, folding around me like wet fog. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the sheets cling to my legs. I noticed my own breathing, each inhale louder than the walls around me, each exhale a pulse in the dark, alone, yet watched by the quiet itself. Night after night, the noises had vanished. First the clock, then the water in the pipes, the hum of the heater. Now, even the patter of rain was only a memory. The house had become a hollow lung, and I was the only sound it allowed. I went to the kitchen for water, the tiles cold beneath my toes. Even my footsteps felt intrusive. I tried to whisper to myself, but the words seemed too sharp, too bright, too alive. I swallowed them. In the living room, the furniture pressed into the corners, shadows pooling in their shapes. I touched the couch, its fabric smooth and damp from the night air. The silence deepened, pulling at the edges of my mind, a quiet that wasn't empty but patient. I thought of leaving, of stepping outside into the fog garden, letting the world smell of wet earth and cold wind. But even the door felt hesitant, as if it didn't want me to disturb the stillness. Back in the bedroom, I lay down. The sheets whispered against my arms, the pillow pressed cold to my cheek. And there it was, the breathing, my own, soft, measured, unhurried, the only sound left. I closed my eyes, felt the quiet fill the room like water. It wrapped around me, and I realized it had been waiting. All the vanished noises, all the muted hums and ticks, had left only this, a single, fragile rhythm, breath, mine, and the house, watching, listening, breathing with me. I let it fold around me. I let the silence deepen, and for the first time, I understood the weight of stillness. The night carried on. The walls pressed closer, and the world beyond the windows had stopped altogether. The window creaked. Something shifted in the corner of the room. But I didn't move. I only breathed. And the house breathed with me. The storm had passed, leaving the yard drenched. Puddles reflected the pale light of a waning moon, and the air smelled sharp, like wet earth and ozone. I stepped outside, boots squelching softly on grass, and noticed it immediately. A mirror leaning against a fence, its glass strangely clear, yet cold, as if it hadn't felt the rain at all. Curious, I approached. The surface didn't shimmer with the droplets clinging to leaves. It didn't ripple with the wind. It only held the world I was in, and someone behind me that I froze. The reflection showed a figure standing there, just behind my shoulder. Tall, pale, still. I turned. Nothing. Just a wet yard. The fence sagging slightly, the distant rustle of leaves. I blinked, and the image remained. Every shift I made, it mirrored behind me. But empty air answered my eyes. The figure's presence was patient, watching me with a silence that pressed into my chest. A breeze moved through the yard, ruffling wet grass, and I felt the air tighten around me. I crouched, brushing fingers along the mirror's edge. The frame was cold, almost pulsing, and when I leaned closer, the figure's face, pale, unblinking, was nearer, as if it had drawn closer while I looked away. I staggered back, feet sinking into mud. The reflection did not change. It did not blink. It only waited. Even the sky seemed still. The clouds paused above the treetops, listening to the hush that had settled. I thought to throw a stick, to shatter the glass and end the stare. My hand trembled, gripping a branch damp with rain. The mirror, the figure, remained unchanged, unthreatening yet heavy, like the air before a distant thunder. The yard felt smaller now, the boundaries of the fence pressing in. I took a step back, then another, but the reflection followed perfectly. Every move, every breath I drew, was mirrored by that silent watcher. I wanted to close my eyes, to let sleep or nightfall erase the image, but even when I blinked, it was there, watching from just behind, just out of reach, the glass holding something I could not name. The world smelled of rain-soaked wood and cold metal. The grass clung to my ankles. The mirror rested against the fence, silent and patient, its presence a weight on the night. I whispered to myself, a soft sound swallowed by the yard, and the figure did not move, did not breathe. It existed only to be seen, and I could not turn away. Hours passed, though I did not count them. The moon sank, and shadows pooled in corners of the yard. I stepped closer again, heart quiet in my chest, and felt the chill of its gaze, a stillness so complete it pressed against my skin. Finally, I stepped back, leaving the mirror leaning against the fence. The figure remained, frozen behind my reflection, as if it had always been there, as if the world beyond the glass had forgotten me. The window creaked inside the house. I didn't look back. I only felt the wet grass beneath my feet, the cold air on my face, and the silent eyes in the mirror following me, patient, always there. The house was quiet, too quiet for the rain that still tapped softly against the windows. Outside, the night was thick with fog, and the smell of wet asphalt lingered in the air. I had been waiting, lying awake, listening to the hum of the heater and the static of silence. It was always the same. Every night, without fail, 3:17. The knock came, soft at first, then deliberate, echoing through the empty hallway. I could hear the wood shift beneath the impact, the faint scent of damp air seeping under the door. I held my breath. The clock ticked slower than usual. I told myself it was the wind, the tree branches brushing the siding. But the rhythm was too precise, too patient. Another knock, a little louder this time. I rose slowly, feet brushing the carpet. Cold air seeped around the doorframe as I reached for the handle. My hand trembled, though it smoothed beneath my fingers. I opened it. Nothing, only the empty porch, wet leaves pressed to the boards, the fog curling against the railing. I stepped outside. The rain had passed, leaving the world damp and still. Then I noticed the footprints, small, wet, glistening, leading from the edge of the porch. Inside, I froze. The smell of wet earth clung to the soles of the prints. Every step measured, deliberate, and they didn't stop at the threshold. They went further, into the house, into the hall, toward the rooms I had locked tight. The floor creaked softly under the weight of something unseen. I could hear the faint drip of water from the eaves. I could smell the damp leather of my coat, the cold chill of night air spilling in through the open door. I wanted to close it. I wanted to slam the door and pretend the sound had been my imagination, but something held me there, a hesitation, a weight pressing in from just beyond the frame. The hallway seemed longer than before. Shadows pooled in corners. The air tasted metallic, like rainwater mixed with iron. The footprints glistened under the pale moonlight, leading past the stairs, past the living room, toward the bedroom. I swallowed. The house felt different. Empty but not silent. The echoes of those knocks lingered in my chest. A static hum that didn't belong. And then I realized I hadn't heard the last knock yet. It came again, so soft this time I almost missed it. 3:17. Exactly. The rhythm of it, inside and outside, in the walls and the floor, followed me wherever I looked. I wanted to retreat, to shut the door and never see the porch again. But I couldn't. The footprints pulled me forward, trailing a wet cold across the wooden floorboards, past the rooms I knew, past the shadows I thought were corners, into the very heart of the house. The night held its breath. Every sound I made seemed amplified. The soft brush of my hand along the railing, the hiss of my boots in puddles, the quiet rustle of my jacket, and then silence, absolute, except for the breath I could feel, the cold air brushing my neck. The last knock had come, the final one, lingering in the quiet, a memory in the walls, a weight in the floor. I stood there listening, the footprints glistening and still, and I realized the night had already moved inside. I had opened the door, and it had followed me. The rain never stopped. It began as a drizzle, soft against the rooftops, the smell of wet earth drifting through the streets. By morning, the gutters were overflowing. By night, the sidewalks had rivers of their own. I walked through the water, boots squelching, watching the reflections ripple beneath pale street lights. But no one was out. No cars, no umbrellas, no movement at all. Only the persistent hum of rain and my own slow, uneven breaths. The town looked the same, but silent. Strange how familiar places feel foreign when you're alone. The bakery, its windows fogged, the playground, swing swaying though no one had touched them. Everything carried the smell of wet wood and cold stone. Days passed, or maybe it was weeks. Time became slippery, flowing like the water creeping over curbs. I spoke to myself, not because I wanted to, but because the silence pressed against my ears, thick and damp. I noticed the people, or the lack of them. The grocery store, usually buzzing with early shoppers, stood empty. The doors unlocked, the aisles glistening from the rain tracked inside. And yet no one came. No one left. The water rose higher each day. My street became a river, my car half submerged. I pushed through puddles up to my knees, the cold bite in my skin, my jacket soaked through, clinging to me like a second skin. And still, no one else seemed aware. I shouted into the empty streets. The echoes came back, softened and warped by the rainfall. No answer, not even a dog barking. Even the birds were gone, leaving only the static hum of persistent drizzle. Sometimes I caught glimpses of movement, a shadow in the corner of an alley, a flicker in a window, but when I approached, nothing remained, only the wet pavement and the smell of rain. I began to walk farther. The river streets swallowed my feet. The old bridge over the creek creaked under my weight. Mist rose from the floodwaters, blurring my vision, making the town look like a memory I could almost touch. I passed the church, its doors swinging in the wind, the bells silent but swaying above me. I imagined voices singing, echoing through the dripping halls. But they were only in my head, or maybe I was the only one left to hear them. I climbed a higher ground, looking back over the flooded town. Roofs poked through water like islands. Streetlights shimmered through sheets of rain, their glow wavering like a heartbeat. And still, the streets remained empty, frozen under the constant gray of clouds. A strange wonder filled me then. I had the whole town to myself. Everything slowed, every sound magnified. the dripping of water from eaves, the soft rustle of wet leaves, my boots pressing into mud. It was beautiful in its own way, terrifying in its stillness. The dread crept in slowly. No one to speak to, no one to warn me, no one to confirm reality. I walked through my home, touching walls damp with rain seeping through cracks, listening to hum of water running into floors and sinks. I realized the rain wasn't just falling outside. It was everywhere, inside, around me, in every creak of the house, every breath I took. I was utterly alone. The sky showed no sign of breaking. The clouds pressed down like a lid. I understood then that I was the only one left to move through this wet, quiet world, to exist in a town swallowed by rain, to feel the endless patter, to hear the water run and the silence press. And as the hours stretched, I walked again through the streets, water up to my knees, the smell of wet earth and cold stone thick in the air. The rain continued. It always had, and perhaps it always would. Alone, with nothing but a hum of falling water and the echo of my own breath. The cabin smelled the same. Damp wood, smoke curling from the old stove, and the soft, constant hum of the storm outside. Rain tapped against the roof in familiar rhythms. I could almost believe I'd never left. The windows were fogged, breath ghosting along the glass as I moved closer. Outside, the world dissolved into gray mist, the same trees leaning like old friends. I sank into the worn armchair by the hearth. The leather creaked under me, the smell of damp moss and wet leaves rising from the floorboards. Everything felt unchanged, comforting even, but then I noticed it. A faint reflection in the window, a shape behind me, not quite solid, not quite shadow. I held my breath. The rain's hum became louder in my ears, the wind scraping softly against the walls. I blinked. The reflection lingered, always just at the edge of vision. I walked through the cabin, touching the walls, tracing the shelves, the grain rough under my fingertips, the faint scent of old paper and soot clinging to my hands. Every corner was empty, every room silent. Yet it watched. I could feel in the chill along my spine, the soft draft that seemed to follow me. Even when I stopped, even when I turned to face the empty corners, the reflection waited. The stove hissed as I stirred a pot of water. Steam fogged the windows further, wrapping the room in warm, wet air. And still it waited, a presence in the glass that mimicked me. Moved when I moved, paused when I paused. I tried to ignore it, focus on the hum of rain, on the rhythm of my own breathing. But awareness lingered, sticky and cold, like water clinging to the skin after a storm. I moved closer to the window. The glass was slick with condensation, my fingers tracing pale lines through the mist. The reflection sharpened. It was me, or something shaped like me. I whispered, almost without thinking, my own voice swallowed by the storm. The shape didn't answer. It only watched. I walked around the cabin slowly. Each step echoed against the wooden floorboards, each breath heavy in the thick air. I turned from room to room, checking corners, shadows, cupboards. Always empty. And always that pale reflection returned. Sitting back in the armchair, I felt a weight press behind my eyes, the knowledge that I was not alone, not in the way I had expected. It was quiet, still, but it was there. I stared at the window again. Rain blurred the world beyond, turning the forest into a gray wash of shapes. And there it was, the faint, watching figure, mirroring me perfectly, but never moving closer. I felt my heartbeat slow, matching the rhythm of the storm. Breathing in the wet, mossy air, I realized I didn't need to look behind me. I could feel it. I had always felt it. The hum of the rain became my companion, the reflection my constant. I reached out, hand trembling, toward the glass. It did not change. It only waited. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the cabin breathed with me. And the figure, my shadowed twin, remained still. I closed my eyes, listened to the rain, felt the hum through the floorboards, the chill along my neck, and slowly I stopped moving, because I understood it was always there, always watching, and I was finally still,